I have some ideas for you for those moments when you might feel like your colors are out of control. Some of them are preventative measures, and other ones can even be useful right there in the moment when you're finding yourself in the situation. Last week I was working on a painting here, and it was specifically about incorporating figures into a scene, human figures. And I was mostly focused on the composition and showing how to use brushwork to make the figures feel organic to the whole picture. And in my excitement, I didn't even think very carefully about the colors that I would be choosing, which is actually kind of weird for me. It's kind of my thing. It's like my everything. But it was a great opportunity actually to find myself in a whoops moment that will be really useful for us to talk about today. And there are several ways to kind of paint yourself back out of a hole like that. This might be surprising, but the first thing that I look at if my colors feel out of control is actually the values, the lights and the darks, and see what they are up to. For me, it's really important to make sure that my darks and my lights are working with me rather than against me. So some colors are naturally darker, some are naturally lighter. You can use that to your advantage, but if you're not paying any attention to it, it might start to do things that you didn't want it to do. Now, in the case of this painting, I did start with a no-tan sketch, which is really a study of the balanced harmony of the lights and the darks. One thing I found when I was making that sketch is that there's a lot of darks because it's a night scene. One thing that I have noticed in my paintings is that when things start to feel a little bit chaotic, I think that my lights and darks are getting a little bit fractured. Now, you might be making a composition that has fractured lights and darks on purpose. For example, in abstract expressionism, that was kind of the point, to have an all-over look and to have no particular focal point, such as this piece by Helen Frankenthaler. The overall effect was the point. There's no masses of dark and masses of light to hold on to kind of climb through the image. The point is, you want to do what you're doing on purpose. And in the case of my image, I wasn't trying to make it look fractured or unfocused. I did want to carry the eye around the image without a single focal point, but I did want to have masses of lights and darks to be able to guide the eye around. And by the way, I could do a whole other video about values and how that affects your color. If you would like, just let me know. Put it in the comments and tell me. Because there's so much that I could say about values and color. But anyway, in terms of this, what I did was I looked at values first to see I needed to define my darks better. So the first thing I did with this painting is I went in with my darkest value paint and just started defining dark areas more distinctly for a minute, with the idea that if I wanted to vary the color of those darks, I could do that later. On to actual color solutions. I am not going to start with the probably most obvious solution, which would be to limit your colors, because I am here about not limiting yourself if you don't want to. And I feel like since that is something that is often brought up, like, oh, you don't want your colors to get out of control, you're going to do a limited palette. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing that I want to say, the most important and helpful thing that I ever do to get myself straight with color is to do a completely different color study. So not even thinking about the composition at all, but laying down the colors that I had chosen for the painting and just exploring them, seeing how they play out next to each other, maybe looking at the original photo reference and trying some colors next to each other in relation to what it's going to be later. But mostly I'm just seeing, are these colors going to work well together? And what am I thinking? Like, what excites me? And this method really helps me in every painting that I do, because I can work out some color problems before I even put a single brushstroke on the painting itself. One thing that I did when I had this slightly out of control painting is I went back and I looked at the paint tubes that I had chosen, and I'd specifically chosen these paint tubes because I felt like they would best accomplish and match some of the colors that were in the original photo that I wanted to make sure that I captured. But then when I looked at it and thought about it and got ready for a color study, I realized there were two paint tubes that I did not want to use after all, and those two colors were phthalo green and cerulean blue. I realized if I just pulled out a tube of phthalo turquoise, I could get to any kind of that turquoise green that I wanted for that one sign. And as far as cerulean blue goes, I can easily mix cerulean blue using phthalo, turquoise, and violet. Now, it may not be exactly the cerulean blue, but in truth, that's not necessary. I just really wanted to have that pale blue sliver, and I could get pretty close to what I was hoping for without using cerulean blue. So I went and I did a color study using 4 main colors: cadmium red, cadmium yellow dark, dioxazine purple, and phthalo turquoise. And then of course, I also used white. In this case, it was titanium white. And this was so useful. And it helped me, by going through this, it helped me see I'm really not that far away from what I was hoping to do with this painting, but there are a few things that I needed to do to make it work better. And here were a couple of them. The first one was I really needed to have a little bit more of a bridge between the colors. And so I decided, because I'm hoping to make this to feel like a warm scene, I used a very bright yellow underpainting or toned ground. So if I'm going to have yellow and if I'm going to have red, there's definitely going to need to be at least a little bit of orange in here. So I decided to introduce some orange into the leaves of the tree. And here and there, there's just a little bit of orange on the guy's jacket too. That helped a little bit. Really, I think that just that touch of orange did so much work. The window kind of thing on the left had been kind of a rose color, and I decided to make that a little bit more peach as well. Another thing that you could do, which I didn't do much of in this painting, but I think that it's a really helpful thing to do if need be, and I was prepared to do it for this, is you could neutralize certain colors if they seem to be competing with what you are trying to get the viewer to look at. I spent a good deal of time thinking about that sliver of light in the doorway and that aqua-colored sign. For some reason, I really need them to be there. They, to me, were part of the draw of this photo in the first place, and I think somebody else who might be more attracted to a more unified look might have decided to make all of their light signs be a more similar color, like maybe they were both blue, or maybe they were both turquoise, or they were both lavender. But I didn't want to do it because what I realized through the whole process of this is that the thing that I like about this image is that it is like a toy box of colors in a moody scene. And I don't really have a single focal point in mind. You might look at this painting and say, I think the focal point is this. And I think if I were to say there was a focal point, it might be the guy on the right. This is sort of like his world, you know, he's experiencing all this. He's watching the backs of the people in front of him and seeing it all. So I guess we are this guy. But generally, I liked the idea of it being more of an all over kind of feeling, that your eye just keeps going through this atmosphere and stopping at these little pieces of color. And this is like this little toy box. So I thought, if indeed I'm really into this toy box mode, I don't want to neutralize any colors, but that is an option. So I tried a little experiment to see, well, if I'm really into this toy box idea where it's really about these little bits of color that I find the most interesting, what if I just totally exaggerated it? And I had these pieces of color floating in, not in space, but they're encapsulated by line, but it really is about these pieces of color. What would that look like? And so I tried it out. I really just traced the image from the photo just to kind of do that part quickly. And I wanted to see, what does it look like when it's floating in white space? And then what does it look like when it is floating in dark space? Because that is, of course, what the original vibe is. It's in this moody evening kind of space. Unifying with a toned ground. Now, toning the ground is something that has been going on for centuries, but generally this toned ground is a subtle thing. It's a way to help you, the painter, not have to just paint right on white, which is kind of a long way to go to kind of build up any color. And plus you might have little bits of white sort of peeking out in between little parts of the brushwork. And for some situations that might be desirable, but in many cases that is not the case. So you can use this toned ground to serve the end painting in a specific way. One thing that I do is if I have leftover paint, or even if I'm just getting ready for a series, I will tone in very bright colors. And this may seem like, I don't know, maybe it sounds fun to you, or maybe it seems like a really ill-advised idea. I know that when I was in my painting atelier, there's one of my classmates, he was very uncomfortable with this practice that I had going on. So we'd be in the life room painting from a live model, and I would walk in with an already toned, turquoise piece of paper, and he would just be like, what are you doing? Anyway, what happens when you start with an extremely strongly colored canvas? What happens is you can get very, very confused, because whatever you're mixing over on your gray or neutral colored palette is going to wind up looking completely different on your brightly colored canvas. Well, guess what? I love that. I love it. It is never a dull moment, and I am basically challenging myself from right out of the gate. So as long as I've done my color study in advance and I know kind of where I'm going with stuff color-wise, and like the underpainting is part of the color study, so that toned ground is part of the color set that I'm working with, then it's just a fun and wild ride of puzzle solving. And I think I've been in conversation with a few people in the comments about your approach to painting. For myself, I do think about it as I am creating problems for myself that I then have to solve. And so for me, this is a wonderful problem. And in the end, I feel that the radiance of this toned ground shines through, or it just, it just glows from underneath. And even if you can't see it at all. And sometimes I do let it peek out, and I think that is something that it's almost like, I think that is like not a trend, but I definitely see people doing it, and I love how it looks. Sometimes I do paintings that are all about that underpainting, that toned ground, and there's a very loose structure on top of it that is kind of like the rebar or the skeleton of the composition that I'm leaving open intentionally so that you can see that underglow just kind of like zzz, buzzing out at you. And I have some kind of deeper reasons why I like to do that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Some other time. If you want to know, just tell me. Toning your ground, the point of it, that in terms of color, is that it will automatically kind of unify your colors. If you're feeling like what you are really focusing on is the composition in your work, like maybe you really want to be focusing on the narrative of what's happening or the shapes, then limiting your palette might be for you. So in this case, Blue Wren mentioned that it looked like what I was working with last week, yellow and purple complementary set with, some satellite colors. So you can get a lot from purple and yellow. You can get a lot of beautiful neutrals, and this could make a very harmonious painting. And then you can have your lightest lights, your darkest darks, and then you can have warm midtones and cool midtones. Here's another strategy you can use if you are just starting the painting. This won't really save you if you're already in the middle of a chaos painting, but it's called a mother color. So you can take a little bit of a color on purpose and purposely mix a little bit of it into all the other colors. So which one should I do? Maybe I'll make everything have a yellow tint or a yellow character, yellow vibe. So here's my yellowy red. I want this to be turquoise. My yellowy turquoise, which turns it kind of into a green. That's not my favorite, but that's something to think about when you're making your plans, huh? And then my yellowy violet. I don't want it to be too brown. I just want to warm it up, And then, of course, the original. What if we compared that to what it looks like? So it would be this versus that. What do you think? Does this one seem more harmonious? Okay, and then there's another similar idea that I've heard called Mother Mud, which I don't know. I don't love that name. But that is created by mixing together all four of the colors in a central thing that you'll add to everything else. So it's going to be a super duper neutral. Oh, it's very red leaning, isn't it? That I'll add to all the other things. Okay. Ooh, it went too far. Well, let's just do that. Okay, well, I really toned it down to exaggerate for the point. And I mean, that's lovely. It's certainly not as vibrant as the original or the slightly yellowed example, but you know, I kind of do love that, honestly, surprisingly. Maybe I'll do a painting using the mother mud. I haven't really on purpose made a mother mud before like this. I mean, actually, I guess I have. Anyway, I haven't done it very much, so it might be fun to experiment with that. How about you? Have you ever done that before? And or would you like to try it and see how it goes? Hopefully these are useful to you. I would love to know if you've ever been in this situation where you're like, my colors are out of control. What do I do? And what did you do? Did you just scrap it? Did you keep going? Did you keep going to the point where it was out of control even more and then you loved it? Or did you limit it down? How do you like to fix this situation when you feel like your colors are out of control? I just also do want to say that, of course, there are going to be moments when we're painting and color feels out of control because there are limitless colors. And then when you put them up against each other, they have limitless responses to each other when they interact when they're next to each other. So doing a black and white painting or a black and white drawing has already so much to consider. And then when you pile color on, there's so many moving parts. And really having that many choices can be oppressive. Sometimes too many choices is not very fun. I don't know what the deal is, but for some reason I feel compelled to try to push that limit whenever I can, because I want to know how far can I go, how many colors can I use before it does get out of control. And I do like to skirt that edge, but it is not always successful and it's never dull. I think all of the stuff that I've been talking about today really fits in with this idea of slow color. I wrote this book called Slow Color Project, and one of the key things is that if we develop a deep relationship with color over time and we have our own language of color, that we are empowered and we can do things that maybe aren't considered following the rules, but we're following our own rules and not feeling constricted by color theory, which is a great tool, but it doesn't have to be the only rule. So if you're interested in thinking about that some more, I do have that book and it's available for sale on my website, and the link is in the description. It's got a big set of exercises to try to deepen your relationship with color. It is my baby and I love it so much. And I have found that pursuing color in this way, in a personal way, has made all the difference in my art practice. I'm so glad that I decided to, instead of only learning about color theory and then, you know, mastering it and then feeling like I'm doing everything right, that instead I'm realizing that all of that is really helpful and it's really great to know all of it. And I think it's important to keep learning all of it, but that my most important compass is right here. And even if it doesn't seem like something should make sense, if it does make sense to me, that is more important. And so when I show you this painting that I made, that I finished, I feel really happy with it. And I'm aware of the fact that there are going to be people, like perhaps that guy from my painting atelier, who might be like, whoa, that's too much color, too many colors. But for me, it was just the right amount and just the right balance. And it's kind of what I was going for. I've got my moody toy box, otherwise known as Ballard Avenue at night. All right, thanks for watching and looking forward to seeing you next time.